You could probably easily make a list of horrifying places to live in the Star Wars galaxy for reasons that have to do with just natural occurrences or creatures, with a lot of those being in the unknown regions, like the sentient swamp trying to take over the galaxy, and no, that's not a joke. But beyond the natural horrors, there were also incredibly oppressive regimes, and today we're going to be talking about one of the worst political entities you could live under in the known galaxy, the Corporate Sector Authority. Out of universe, the Corporate Sector Authority, or CSA for short, was established as one of the earliest bits of expanded lore for Star Wars, having been introduced by Brian Daley's book Han Solo at Star's End, which released in 1979, before even the release of Empire Strikes Back. But in-universe, Republic contact with what would later be called the Corporate Sector, a region of space at the end of the still-in-progress Hydian Way hyperlane, stretches all the way back to the 4500s BBY, or years before the Battle of Yavin. Initially, a small set of human-occupied planets were found, with planets like Eti and Amund having been settled by earlier explorers from the core, while Ession and Oxen were settled by humans or near-humans from the nearby Tion hegemony, the homeland of Zim the Despot. For 4 millennia after this discovery, interest in the region from the Republic was pretty sparse. But in 500 BBY, a group of companies eventually known as the Expansionist Oligarchy, sick of the regulations they had to follow under the Republic, promised quick growth and astounding profits if left to their own devices in the rich region. The result couldn't be described as anything but abusive. The workers who moved there were exploited to a huge degree, but because the corporations controlled all transport and communications in and out of the region, few in the rest of the Republic knew about it. Eventually, this led to local resistance from the workers, up to and including uprisings, and eventually the horrifying extent of these abuses made their way to the Senate. This scandal was enough for the Republic to limit or evict the corporations responsible, but the first experiment in what would become the corporate sector was already a resounding failure. A generation later, the Republic decided to try again, this time officially establishing the corporate sector. According to the corporate sector sourcebook, the new slate of companies in this renewed project were able to buy or lease entire star systems, developing them as they saw fit, though this time with a detachment of Republic judicial ships to allegedly oversee them and prevent the embarrassment of the prior experiment. The exact nature of the rights that were actually being protected is unclear, and in a lot of cases, despite there technically being Republic observers there was an attitude of who's really gonna know what's going on. But all of this was made possible by there being tens of thousands of systems in the region to exploit, all full of resources, and shockingly none being home to any other native species, allowing opportunities for development and profit to abound. Hold that thought, though. The Republic did put some limitations on these corporations that we know of, which were harder to cover up if broken than the destruction of local populations or specific abuses of worker rights. For example, worlds could no longer have their entire ecology disrupted, but as corporations still largely had free reign and the only tax to be paid was the federal tax to the Republic rather than other local taxes that other sectors, systems, or planets might have on top of that, most megacorporations of the galaxy still bought some space in the region. Over time, though, the companies felt increasingly constrained by the very few restrictions which did exist, especially on their ability to expand into other systems and the prohibitions against slavery. Many of the corporations ended up siding with the CIS in the Clone Wars as a result, forcing out the loyalist companies and bringing the sector over to the CIS entirely. After the war, like many other CIS assets, all of the corporate sector was nationalized by the Empire. But Baron Orman Togg, founder of the Galactic Corporate Policy League in the last days of the Republic, convinced Palpatine to give over control of much of this newly nationalized industry in the region to corporations which had remained loyal like his own, forming the basis for the new legal entity, the CSA, in a move likely inspired by what had been done with similar privatizations in Nazi Germany in the real world. The CSA was given essentially free reign of the kind they had in the original experiment, entirely absent oversight from the new empire that they'd been subjected to at least a nominal degree under the Republic. Rather than being a burden on the Imperial Navy or other military resources, policing was done under the auspices of the Corporate Sector Authority's own military, with the Espo police force acting as the front line, and a set of surplus ships from earlier periods in galactic history, ranging from the ancient Invincible Dreadnought to the more recent Recusants of the CIS, along with some other ships the Empire was willing to sell them, being used to protect their own shipping from piracy and some other, shall we say, extracurricular activities. In exchange, this CSA would provide the Empire with a discount on all manufactured and raw goods, and, quote, 3% of gross profits, 9% of raw materials, and 20% of rare elements. Along with this, they were expected to leave a like on this video and subscribe for more from Corey's datapad, a stipulation which many in the CSA found confusing, but which they agreed to nonetheless. Scientists would often try to explain the aforementioned lack of local life in such a rich area aside from the original human colonies relative to other sectors in the galaxy through weird appeals to things like stellar phenomena blocking development. But the real reason was actually much simpler. As was often pointed out in the context of the exploited workers, there's fewer holocams on the fringes of the galaxy. In reality, these systems were often home to a great many species, which those in charge of the corporate sector covered up. This was especially true after the Empire expanded the CSA's territory to over 30,000 local systems. A war broke out between the CSA and the nearby Trianii species, who had colonies on some of the worlds the CSA claimed as theirs. But on top of that, 11 additional species were known to have been covered up by TOG and the other local corporations, with many suspecting dozens more were forcibly relocated or exterminated by the CSA. Especially in this new era, both corporations and individuals flocked to the region. On the corporate side, the possibility of becoming a voting member of the Directs Board, driving policy of the CSA as the governing entity and technically sole employer of the region, was very attractive, on top of the mountains of money they could make just by being a company operating in the area. For individuals, the advertising of a booming economy seemed worthwhile to explore for a new start after the savagery of the Clone Wars, and especially for non-humans, it seemed like a way to escape the repressive anti-alien policies of the Empire. But what they didn't realize is that the strict control of information out of the area from the workers hid the depraved nature of existence within the authorities' borders. Even for those who didn't fall into outright slavery in the CSA, according to the Essential Atlas, migrants, quote, found themselves not citizens but consumers, and given privileges rather than rights. Life could be an endless struggle for promotions and paychecks, accompanied by the ceaseless din of advertising from a consumerist culture on overdrive. Which, wow, sounds horrible, wonder what that's like. And again, while the Espos didn't have the same galactic reputation for fear that the Stormtroopers did, a lot of this was from simply covering up atrocities which may spur outrage, rather than any actual restraint on the power of the secret police. Although it was in many ways a creature of the Empire, the collapse of the Empire did nothing to hamper the CSA's growth. It likely simply meant more profit, since the Imperial remnant would have lost the capacity to enforce the material taxes they levied under Palpatine. I would expect this probably came closer to the fall of Coruscant when institutional power for the Empire really fell apart, rather than right when Palpatine was killed. The CSA was then largely left alone, even under the New Republic, despite their atrocities in some case exceeding the Empire's. Even the Yuuzhan Vong War left the CSA untouched, although they did ally with Corellia in Corellia's revolt against the Galactic Alliance in the 40s ABY, probably hoping a less centralized galaxy might mean more opportunities to profit from customers or even expand their power base. That's going to do it for our look at one of the worst regimes in Star Wars history. Thank you for watching, and again remember to leave a like and subscribe for more if you have enjoyed the video. Special thanks as always to the patrons whose names you're seeing on screen.